cases had dried up. The winter air was uncharacteristically warm for the season, and Jackson and I were both bored out of our minds. Not to mention that the money was starting to run out, and rent was coming up, and let me tell you, our landlord was one of the greediest fellas in the city. Or at least, he seemed like it to me at the time. Little did I know, soon Jackson and I would be facing off against the most money-grubbing fiends out there. I told the person at the door to come in, and in no time at all.
Why, hello there, boys.
Now we had never seen this mook around before, and what with his smiley demeanor and all, I was immediately suspicious. I didn't say that, of course, and instead asked the man's name and what business he had here.
Of course, wherever are my manners? The name's Mr. Green. I presume you two are Humboldt and Jackson? Pleasure to meet you, boys. Do you mind if I sit? Now, good sir, you asked me what business I had here. Well, may I say it is very important business indeed. A business of murder.
A murder? No, that wasn't something we got asked to investigate every day.
I asked the fellow if he could give us any more details. The victim, location, any suspects, etc. But instead, he just said this.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, boys, you misinterpret me. This is a business of murder in the making.
I asked that he elaborate a little bit on that.
Detectives, the world is being killed. I don't know if you've noticed, but between melting ice caps, the disintegration of the ozone layer, and wildfires across the planet Earth is dying. And I have a sneaking suspicion of who's to blame.
I asked him who that might be.
Why, boys? The common man. Every time a pedestrian drives their gas-guzzling car instead of riding a bike, or chooses to buy produce that was shipped far overseas in aeroplanes rather than support local farmers, or drinks from plastic straws instead of metal ones, the planet withers away a little more. It really is a terrible shame. Here, you might want to take a look at this. Well, boys, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
And with that, the strange little man was gone, just as quickly as he'd arrived. Our conversation with Mr. Green had left a bad taste in my mouth, and I told Jackson as much. He agreed with my sentiment, but we figured we still might as well take a peek at the tape he'd given us.
What size is your carbon footprint?
The carbon footprint, that I don't know.
Whatever it is, the whole population of the world, make that a very, very big number.
How much carbon I produce? Is that it?
You mean the effect that my living has on the earth in terms of the products I consume?
After watching through the tapes given to us by Mr. Green, Humboldt and I decided we needed to do some investigating of our own. Not that the footage we received wasn't persuasive at all, but something seemed fishy. So we decided we'd better visit some of our old haunts and search for information.
Jackson and I used to go there for drinks quite often back in our golden days, so we knew the barman there, Spooky Jazz. I was surprised to see what he had done with the place over the years. It was quite the humdinger of a bar, and I told him that.
Why, thank you, Humboldt. It's good to see you boys back here again. Can I get you boys anything?
I told him no. We were on the clock, even though at that point I would have killed for a good scrambled eggs on the rocks. But no, we were here on business, not pleasure.
Ah, the old 9 to 5. What can I help you boys with?
I explained our situation to him and watched as that classic Spooky Jazz smile slowly spread across his face. I was glad to see it. We'd been friends long enough that I knew that this meant he had information for us.
Well, detectives, you're in luck. I just so happened to run into this Mr. Green of yours a couple days ago. The little imp rubbed me the wrong way, let me tell you. But his spiel reminded me of some old articles and tapes I came across when I was cleaning out the cellar here. Come with me. Corporations' involvement in climate crisis. I haven't had a chance to look through everything. What I've seen, it'll be a good help to you fellows. Good luck.
That's one of the things that I think about when I buy gas, for instance, right? So like, if you have a car and you're going to buy gas for it, is there a company that you could buy from that would be more sustainable than another one? No, there isn't. It's almost an impossible decision to make as a consumer, right? The only thing that you can do is not buy gas at all. It makes it hard for consumers to sort of know what to do.
Like all of you, I get a lot of my information from newspapers, magazines, TV, internet, and all that. Looking at how much organizations lobby and get governmental policies kind of in their favor. There is the coal lobby, which doesn't want coal-powered plants to go away naturally because it's in their self-interest. They have only recently started thinking about renewables. It's the same thing with oil and gas. When the hydrocarbon industry in Houston, when people started building things out in the 70s in the Gulf of Mexico, started producing oil, and that's what fueled our growth over the past 30, 50 years. All those systems are all still there in the ocean. 50 years on, many of these steel structures are rusted and corroded. You can't really get them out because once you start taking them out, they're going to scatter and become pieces. So decommissioning is going to be a big challenge. And they didn't think about it then. Renewable companies are not thinking about it now. So from a company standpoint, big corporation standpoint, the attitude is still bottom line. And there is certain level of social and communal benevolence and all those things. But there is still a lot of gaps which I don't think any of the companies are thinking about.
We know how to create renewable energy resources. When it comes to architecture, we know how to make more energy efficient, less carbon intensive building. We have the technology, it's doable, we're not waiting for it, so it's there, right? I don't see it in many ways as a technological problem. It's really, to me, I think it's a question of political and cultural will, right? So we have the knowledge to do it, what does it take to implement? So how fast can it happen? Probably not fast enough, unfortunately, but we have the means to do it. It's a question of how do we get it to happen? And how do we get it to happen faster?
They have peddled the notion that they're not responsible for how consumers use their products. They're providing an economic service to the world. They've helped economic growth. They've helped develop the world, the United States in particular, through the use of fossil fuels. That all may be true, but they also have far more significant influence on congressional policy and legislation and regulation. They have invested in deceiving the public as well as Congress itself on the nature of climate change and the veracity and knowledge of climate science. And so they're much more powerful in Congress in terms of policy and how the economy evolves than individual consumers, as well as corporations that use a lot of energy. And so I would put the onus on the corporations themselves far more than consumers.
Corporations and other large entities can definitely do a lot more.
Corporations have one agenda, whatever that is for them. Usually it's selling a product or a lifestyle or something like that. And then I think that too often this sort of urgent need to address climate change and to really work on it is either swept under the rug or just not addressed. It just feels like it's not in many corporations' best interest to raise awareness about climate change and to do the right thing on behalf of the planet.
Well, that was a concerning development.
We had known there was something up with Mr. Green, but this wasn't what we expected. The murder in the making, the murderer-to-be, who Humboldt and I had been looking for all this time, was the very man who had given us the case in the first place.
Good. You're in.
Here he was, Mr. Green, or should I say Mr. Greenwashing, in the devious flesh, and Jackson and I weren't gonna let him off too easy. It was time for Mr. Green to face the music. Jackson and I pulled out every stop, showed him how and every which way to Sunday, and we knew he was just a puppet for those big corporations running the show, the ones really killing the planet. And yet,
the little scoundrel had the nerve to grin at us all the while.
Well, 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 boys. You did it. You solved my climate crisis riddle. But tell me, what have you really proved? Big companies may or may not have an impact on the health of the world. We may or may not pollute the seas, flood the air with chemicals, and destroy the habitats of countless species. But what can you two do about it? The companies will keep doing what they must, and you will sit here raising your alarms as if anyone will notice, or even care. Besides, what I said earlier is true. Citizens are to blame as well. You all have seen the proof of that. I had hoped you would agree with my side of the argument, but I see I overestimated you two. Goodbye, boys.
we didn't know what to do next. Where'd he go from such a sound defeat?
The tape had been lost in the shuffle, but it was definitely one we had grabbed from Spooky Jazz. Trying to rally our spirits, I managed to convince Humboldt to give it a watch. Not much we could do besides that anyhow.
It's not like you can turn a switch on and we can go from fossil fuels to renewables. That's not going to happen. It's simply not practical. We have come a long way. I'm very pleased to see how much importance renewables are being placed all around the world. I think a sustained transition would be the way to go.
I think we would all benefit from individuals, including myself, thinking about our patterns of consumption and how we might change those for the better of the environment.
One of the basic things we got to do, if we want a more sustained future, we really have to think about how we can consume less, how we can consume to the level what we need, and to the level that we are comfortable but not excessive, comfortable but not wasteful. You look around you, there's so much waste. That's still going on.
Now that said, it doesn't mean that consumers don't have control over how they run their own households or what transportation options they use. More electric vehicles are certain to come. We can use public transportation. We can walk to work or reduce our own climate footprint. And years ago, I wrote a guide on how householders can reduce their emissions from the average of 23,000 pounds per average household per year, gradually over sensible investments that cost very little and let's recover their costs over less than a year or maybe a couple of years.
I think it could happen. Yeah. I think that it would have to be an enormous change of a paradigm shift. Like we would have to address this at every scale, ground up and top down, through policy, through technology, through the economy, and changing people's values about what matters. And I think it could happen. I think we have a lot of the tools that we need to do it right now.
I actually think for too long there has been too much emphasis put on individuals and individuals as consumers, let's say, to address these climate problems and environmental problems. So I think a lot of what you see, well, let's talk about green building, sustainable building. Right now, if you want to build a really energy efficient house, you are welcome to do that, but it's kind of on you, right? An individual has to make the choice to do that.
Three different ways of looking at that issue. One is that consumers are responsible because they're the ones that burn all the carbon that companies provide. The other is that the companies are responsible because they're the ones that dig it out of the ground and profit from distributing it around the world to end users. And the other is that governments around the world and the international climate diplomacy itself has a strong role to play, and they have not acted fast enough in terms of national or international climate policy or energy policy. So there's no scientific basis whether to assign 100% to consumers. I simply divide it into three, and we have shared responsibility as governments, as consumers, and as fossil fuel companies to make sure that we invest in the proper transition away from fossil fuels.
Concrete has huge carbon emissions associated with it, right? So if we found ways to change that, it has major impact. And I don't think that change is going to come from individuals specifying or requiring kind of a slightly different concrete mix. It comes from like big changes to that industry.
I think that it's really hard to walk the walk of sustainability if you don't have the support of your government. So not talking about corporations here, but just policies and the state itself and how supportive that organizational system is of sustainability. So for instance, you can have all of the best intentions, I think, as an individual, as a consumer, and you still can't move the needle in any real way unless it's something that's structurally supported by the state.
Put pressure on our elected officials, because as a democracy, those people are supposed to speak for us and speak on our behalf and do things in the public interest. And I think that's one of our primary levers for doing that. I think individuals can make a lot of choices individually, but I think that we also need to make choices and decisions collectively, and that's what we have a political infrastructure for, is to allow collective decision making. And we need to sort of recognize that and value it and take advantage of it.
We cannot continue to use fossil fuels the way we have. So it's a matter of transitioning from a carbon-dominant energy economy to investing more heavily in renewable sources that the cost of which are falling dramatically. And wind in particular is cheaper now per kilowatt hour generated than a coal-fired power plant or a gas-fired power plant. So it's certainly possible to go renewable. It will take decades of time. And that's part of the reason I focus on oil and gas companies, to help that transition away from carbon and avoiding additional investment into additional carbon resources instead of renewables.
There is a potential future in which the best interest of the corporation might also be something that's supportive of environmental health, maybe by redesigning the system, right? Like rethinking flows of products and labor and, the ways in which we engage with the environment.
We are part of the environment, and everything we do to consume resources, to protect resources, to work together, is all interconnected in terms of both good and bad impacts on the environment.
We can do it. We can do it. It's going to be a slow but sustained process, I hope.
So Jackson, what can we do? Well, Humboldt, it looks like if we want change, we have to push for it to happen. Sitting idly by will get us nowhere.
We cannot do nothing as our world is destroyed before our very eyes.
It's just like those experts said. Things can change if we all take action. No, not everything lies on the shoulders of the consumers, but if the corporations running the show are ever to change their ways, we have to show them that they need to.
I second that. We do live in a democracy after all, and as individuals, it is our duty to utilize that in the most effective way we can. We've got to get out there, Jackson. Vote for the politicians who understand the plight of the world, and write to those who don't.
In the meantime, I'll cut down on my carbon emissions, and I encourage you to do the same, Humboldt.
I will, Jackson. Things have to change if we want the world to survive.
Things will change.